Hello, hello. Welcome to the Changer's Guide to Domination. That's right, today we're tackling Tzeentch. So, today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Tzeentch roster, take a look at each of the units, what they do, how they perform in the context of the roster, and then we're going to be taking a more general look at the Tzeentch roster in play and how they approach the game of Domination. As you can probably guess, this video is most going to be geared towards Domination, but it can help you in other game modes as well. So, to start us off, let's talk Lords. So, far and away, the most common Lord pick and the strongest Lord pick is Kairos Fateweaver himself. The OG, the legendary Lord, he is hands down the best. Take a look at why. So generally, the kind of spell kit you're taking is Blue Fire. You always take Blue Fire when you're playing Tzeentch. It is a very, very strong spell and is very core to their playstyle. We'll talk a little more about that when we get to the gameplay examples, but just know that it is a very, very strong spell and it's very versatile. In addition to that, you can take something like Harmonic Convergence if you'd like. It's a very strong buff. Or things like Regrowth if that's your thing. In addition to that, if we're looking at abilities, you always take Life Leeching. Because you're often spamming Blue Fire or just Harmonic Convergence or these cheap spells, this ability procs very often, so you'll end up generating a very, very large amount of Winds of Magic over the course of a game. So this is a very strong ability and one of the main draws of Kairos Fateweaver. Fires of Change is fine. Again, you're spamming a lot, so it doesn't hurt to have this go off. This is an, if I have money, I'll include it. Greater Arcane Conduit is an auto-include. More recharge, more spell mastery means more damage on our spells, and they're out more often. That's just a plus. Oracle of Eternity, just damage fist, is very nice if you think Kairos is going to be threatened by something. If you're going against Wood Elves and you're worried about getting netted and shot, then this is a great ability to keep him alive. But if you don't have something threatening him, you can skip it. Gaze of Fate. That's the other ability that makes Kairos so strong. Point and click net, minus 40 melee attack. It really allows you to dictate certain engagements, specifically cav engagements or mobility tools, and just completely deny your opponent value of their cavalry by netting them and stopping their charge and allowing you to get the charge to come in, or even just netting something in the open and just shooting the shit out of it. Again, we can take a better look at this once we get into gameplay examples. Scroll of Destiny is another one. If I have the WOM, I'll take it. Or if I have the gold, I'll take it. It's just free WOM. These abilities aren't that good, so I don't generally take it. If I'm not taking Kairos, the other lords I would consider is Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch, also known as Voldemort. And the only real reason I would take him is I would take him on a disc with basically just Blue Fire, and the ability I want from him is Sword of Change. It's a Chaos Spawn summon, 50-meter range, which isn't a big drawback because he is flying and can get wherever he wants. You take this when you need to collapse an enemy gun line. When you get in the back line, just be disruptive. Just having a nice unit of Chaos Spawn, an Unbreakable Summon in the back line that can just really cause any problems can be very, very advantageous. In addition, he's also a bit cheaper when stripped down, but not a whole lot. Kairos is pretty cheap. Those are the two lords you're primarily going to be using. If Kairos gets nerfed someday, then you could also see something like an Exalted Lord of Change, as he's a solid choice in and of himself. He's just overshadowed, but he does have some nice abilities, namely the Portal Glyph for a Fury Summon, or you'll see Harry the Herald, just for Locus of Conjuration as well as Chromatic Tome to generate large amounts of WOM. Again, on a disc, Blue Fire, all that. So that's Lords. Moving on to Heroes. The Heroes aren't very good because they're all casters, and so are all of your Lords. They're all dedicated casters. Like, none of these are a melee character. The Iridescent Horror is a missile character, but it's okay. So you don't see these guys a whole lot because you don't usually need another caster. If, in the future Tzeentch gets a melee character, or if their lords get nerfed, I could see the Cultist coming out a lot more, because he does have some very strong abilities, namely Wand of Whimsy, combined with Kindle Flame. So Kindle Flame gives fire weakness, which synergizes very well with all the fire damage you already have in your roster. Then Wand of Whimsy also gives melee attack and weapon damage to your entire army. So spamming those two passives by just spamming cheap spells is a very, very effective way to buff your entire army. So we used to see that a lot before we got more options, but now we have more options. You don't see this guy a whole lot, but I could see him coming back if the circumstances are right. On to infantry. Tzeentch's infantry isn't that exciting, I'll be honest. So starting with Marauders, there's not a whole lot special about them other than they have the barrier and magic attacks. Unfortunately, they pay about 50 gold of a premium for that, and the barrier doesn't help them a whole lot. It's a very small amount of hit points for an infantry unit who's going to be taking damage very, very quickly. So Tzeentch's Marauders tend to underperform compared to other Marauders for the price point. Even they tend to underperform compared to the based ones, again, for the price point. So they're fine. Like, they're still a solid unit, but don't expect them to win any of the games on their own. Spears, same thing, anti-large. Horrors are a nice cheap shooting option. They're fairly self-sufficient with decent melee stats, but generally you're only really going to bring them if you want their shooting, which is nice against large amounts of light armored targets. So things like zombies, most of the undead, ogres, that kind of thing. There's just a lot of big light armored targets. They can be very, very effective. Okay, skip from Forsaken for a second. Let's talk about Chaos Warriors. There's nothing that unique about Tzeentch Chaos Warriors. They're armored, they're silver shielded. They're a really nice backbone for your front line. So they're very often going to be what your front line is comprised of, with just a couple of Chaos Warriors, 4 or 5 as your front line. They suffer from the same things that most elite infantry do, namely big nuking spells, Pit of Shade, as well as Blow. But they're very resilient to most everything else with their armor and their shields. So they're very resilient to missile fire, which is very, very nice for Tzeentch. And they're just very tanky in general, which Tzeentch sorely needs. And then there's a Halberd variant if you're worried about large more than missiles. Forsaken, on the other hand, are more of a shock infantry. This goes for all the Forsaken and every Chaos faction, but Tzeentches are probably the best. They serve as a shock infantry. They have a very high charge bonus, but they're quite a bit squishier than Chaos Knights. They have less armor, they lack the shields, they lack a lot of HP, and a lot of hit points. So typically I use these guys in reserves to come in and clean up low health infantry units or try to actually flank and get onto the enemy missile positions or their backline. They're very, very good at just running into lightly armored infantry and just tearing it up very quickly and moving on to the next one. As opposed to Chaos Warriors, who are a much more grindy option. They're, like I said, they're a more solid tanky unit, so I tend to bring them my front line, and then I'll bring Forsaken as the reserves to get around the sides or just get where I need them to be faster. Chosen, they're Chaos Warriors with better stats. You almost never see them because they just get one-shot by spells. And they're really hefty investment. Severed Claw, I talked about these in my Tzeentch ROR video. They're solid, they don't do anything unique. You have other Halberd units, you have other anti-large. They're fine, but you don't really need them because you have other things that do the same job. Onto missiles. Pink Horrors are really solid. They do good damage, they have reasonable range. Their barriers make them fairly durable against melee attackers if you can peel them quickly. Their big weakness is other shooting, specifically other archers. They trade well into guns, as most indirect fire do, but into archers they tend to take damage very, very quickly as they have very light armor and not a ton of HP. So if you're playing against a heavy shooting faction, I generally skip them. But if you're playing against a more melee faction and you can protect them, they're actually going to pay for themselves more often than not. They do very, very good damage. Assault Pink Horrors is an upgrade. They're a lot more durable in melee because of their increased melee stats, but they're still just as vulnerable at range. So it's basically the same caveat of when you want to bring them. And yeah, it's usually a matter of you'd rather have 2 cheap ones than 1 expensive one. So generally you skip out on these guys. They do have Arcane Mirth, which gives you a little bit of Wham recharge, but here's Tzeentch. You already have all the Wham recharge you're going to need. Like, you already have enough. Blazing Squealers. Their ability is not super useful, I find. There's like 2 approaches to it. The first is that you just try to use it to reload a lot of units all at once. You just bunch up all your horrors, your pinks, your blues, and just reload them. Which I find to be very hard to do in a realistic game situation. Like, if you actually have the time to just clump up all of your horrors in a safe place, you've probably already won the game. You don't need the extra ammo. The other option is use it to restore ammo on a very, very expensive piece, like, a Burning Chariot or a Soul Grind or something like that. But the issue I find with that is, well, either you're not going to take a unit like that if it can't get its value off its first round of ammo, or you're just going to take a second one. Like, you're not going to pay $1,400 for a reload when you could just buy a second one for not a lot more. Especially since the reload only gives you about 30% of your ammo back. That said, these guys are a really nice missile piece. Like, they just hit really, really hard, as well as applying the Warp Flame effect, and having really good melee defense. They're actually pretty tanky in melee. So the ability I'd skip out on, but they're actually just a really solid missile piece. Again, they're very weak to shooting, so you can't bring them to shooting factions. But against more melee-oriented factions, they're a solid piece. Okay, Cav and Chariots. Chaos Chariots is Tzeentch. Nothing really special about them. They're a chariot. They do the job. If you need a chariot, it's a solid piece. You're not going to go out of your way to bring it if you don't need a chariot, though. Chaos Knights. Skipping Domination for a second, let's talk about both variants of Chaos Knights. Chaos Knights are really, really good tanky cav. They have excellent armor at 120, as well as a ton of hit points. 81k hit points plus 800 barrier. It's a ton of hit points for a cav unit. If we compare that to like Bretonnian Cav for a second, take a look at Bretonnian, Knights of the Realm. They have 67k. They're 6.7k HP. So that's almost 2k more, no, more than 2k more HP. They're really, really tanky, especially if you can get them out of combat and recharge that barrier. So they're very nice for controlling the mobility game and just kind of being a bit of an attention sponge for your opponent. Which a disruptive piece that could really challenge the enemy cav and punish it if they're being ignored. Like if your opponent just tries to ignore them and outmaneuver them with a faster cav, you just follow them and recharge them. So they're a big problem and actually force your opponent to deal with them. And then lances serve more as your infantry clearing when you're not being contested. They're much better at just like using their hefty charge modes to lance down infantry, march infantry, or archers or anything like that. But the basic variant has so much more melee defense that usually if I'm trying to contest enemy mobility, cav, that sort of thing, then I generally want the basic variant to fight that battle. Doom Knights. Doom Knights are odd. They have a lot of HP per model, which makes them a very good target if you want to combine with something like regrowth, but honestly, elite flying cav has never been that good, and it's at an all-time low right now because of the buggy way flying units work, where like if one model gets caught, they'll all go back for that model, so they have a very hard time disengaging. So it's kind of like, well, you send them in and hope they can win, because they have a really hard time getting out. And with only 36 melee defense, they kind of tend to take damage pretty quickly, despite their heavy armor and like decent HP pool. They just really struggle to perform, in my experience. They take a lot of damage. They're very easy for your opponent to pin in place. I struggle to find value with these guys, which is unfortunate because they're a really cool unit. ROR ones, I mean, they suffer from a lot of the same problems. Their ability is nice. It does good damage, kind of like a tear-down rock drop, but again, because you struggle to disengage, it's very hard to get a second one off. So you don't tend... Like, I don't think I've ever seen all 5 uses go off. You're lucky if you get 2. So, yeah, if I'm going to bring a Doom Knight, I'll probably bring the ROR, but I'm never really incentivized to bring a Doom Knight. Missile Cav and Chariots. Marauder Horsemen of Tzeentch. If you have watched any Tzeentch tournament play lately, you've seen these guys spammed to Kingdom Come. Like, these are probably the best unit on the roster, hands down. Marauder Horsemen in general, on every roster that has them, are incredibly strong. These are probably the best of the lot, to be honest. They have Barrier, which makes them an incredibly powerful skirmishing tool, because, you go and you trade a volley within their skirmish cav, then these guys back off and basically just heal up that volley, so you just are at a net positive, which is incredibly strong. On top of that, they just have really good missile strength. They have Warp Flame, which increases their damage even more, and increases the damage of anything else hitting that target, just by lowering the armor, as well as, flaming magical attacks. These guys are very, very good, and you'll be seeing them a lot on the battlefield as or against Tzeentch. They're also your only real, cheap ground-based mobility tool, which means you need them for capture weight a lot of the time. You need to just maneuver them around the fight so you can actually apply capture weight, because, like I said, your low-tier infantry isn't that good, so you're generally relying on higher-tier infantry, because you don't have as many bodies. So in order to hold a point while fighting, you need these guys to just sit behind your infantry, or even behind the enemy infantry, out of the way, to apply capture weight. Burning Chariots. These things have one job, and they do it really damn well. They snipe single entities. Specifically in an instance where you have air superiority, you just fly this guy right over the enemy single entity and just blast it to hell. And they're really, really good at it. These guys can just shred single entities very, very quickly. They're kind of your nuclear option when it comes to sniping. The Tzeentch is already very good at sniping with things like Blue Fire and Soul Grinders, and even like a Gaze of Fate and Skirmish Cav. So if all of that fails to kill your target, you can bring one of these guys, but generally all that other stuff is going to get the job done pretty well. So if you really need to kill a single entity, you can bring these guys, but it's a pretty hefty investment. And you need to be careful, because they have very little ammo and can waste it very easily. So you turn off fire at will, you get them in the exact position you want, and then make sure the target is not moving much, or they're going to waste a lot of their ammo. Monsters and Beast. Tzeentch Furies. Tzeentch has to rely on their Furies a lot more than any of the other Chaos factions in my experience. They're very good Fury-wise. I mean, Furies in general are quite good. They're fast, they hit pretty hard, they tear apart light armor, but they are very, very squishy, so you be very careful at the engagements you take. But they are your only cheap mobility option, aside from Skirmish Cav, which aren't melee. They're your only cheap melee mobility option, whereas Khorne has Fleshhounds, Slaanesh and Warriors of Chaos have Hellstriders. Tzeentch has to rely on the Furies. So you gotta be really careful with your Fury play, and very discerning about what engagements you send them into, and keep them alive a little bit more. That said, they're actually a really good tool for punishing light cav, because your opponent's light cav can never get a charge on them because they're flying. You just drop them on light cav, pepper them in light cav with your skirmish cav, and they are a very effective tool for winning the mobility engagement. So they're a very, very important tool for Tzeentch. You're not going to leave home without at least one or two. If that mobility tool has armor, well, now you have Screamers. Screamers are a flying anti-large AP unit. They have excellent anti-large bonus, and they excel at tearing apart large targets. Single entities, cavalry, monsters, infantry, they destroy everything. They have very, very good animations, and they pack very tightly, so a lot of the models will actually engage in melee and just tear apart large units. On top of that, they have pretty good HP, a pretty good HP pool for a flying unit, which makes them very, very sticky and hard for your opponent to get rid of. They are a little vulnerable to shooting, however, because they do have pretty wide, flat hitboxes, so you need to be careful of that. A combo I personally really like is to take Kairos with these guys, pop Harmonic Convergence on them. It doubles their melee stats. Like when Kairos has Harmonic Convergence with Great Archon, it gives 26. So it literally doubles their melee stats, and they shred anything. They'll kill single entities, they'll kill Cav, whatever you need, these guys will fuck it up really fast. These guys are pretty underrated in my experience. You never leave home without a couple of these guys in your reserves. Chaos Spawn. Again, if you've been playing Domination lately or just watching tournaments, these guys need no introduction. Unbreakable monster infantry, hefty weapon strength, and armor sundering. They are, however, quite lightly armored, so you need to keep them safe from shooting, but they are your primary anti-armor option. None of your infantry has AP except for the halberds, which don't excel killing infantry, so if you need to kill armored infantry, Spawn of Tzeentch are the way to go. They don't have AP themselves, but they have hefty weapon strength and armor sundering, which allows everything else to trade into them better, especially when you stack that armor sundering with the warp flame from your horsemen, or blue fire, or wherever else you get it from, which lowers armor an additional 10, so you're down 40 armor, so you can bring things down to a reasonable amount of armor and actually punch through them pretty effectively. They're very, very effective when stacked with Chaos Warriors. Even Marauders can get the job done. Yeah, they're a really solid unit. They are your go-to anti-armored infantry option. The Beard Spawn. So imagine everything I just said, but now it has 20% Fizz resist, so it's actually pretty tanky, and causes terror. This is the best ROR on the roster. Like, hands down, you take these guys in most matchups. Anytime terror is useful, you bring these guys. Because they're also your cheapest terror option. You do have Kairos, but Kairos isn't really that good in melee, so you kind of be very careful about what melee gauge you send him into. But unless you're facing Undead or Slaanesh, you're always bringing these guys. Or Slaanesh, not Slaanesh, of Tzeentch. This thing is a piece of shit, even after the buffs. Fairly Luminous Powers is fine, but like you don't have leadership issues. Chaos Warriors are fine, Spawn are unbreakable. Like your front line's gonna do fine. And then this ability is just bad. Like up to 20% spell mastery. So it has map wide range, but because it has to charge up, you're not gonna get a whole lot of use to it. Tzeentch plays a very like cagey, kitey style. They want to be spamming blue fire like right out of the gate, and they don't want to stop till they're out of WOM. So by the time this thing gets charged up, you're going to have used a very, very large amount of your Winds of Magic. So you're not going to get a whole lot of value out of this guy. This guy, like to get the proper use out of this guy, you want to get him charged up and then start casting spells. Tzeentch cannot wait for that to happen. They really need to be casting spells right out of the gate. So this ability is just not that good. And like, even if everything I just said wasn't true, it's not a very high like difference. Like 20% is kind of underwhelming for 1300. I mean, yeah, it does other things, but it's not that good. It's kind of underwhelming. All right, Lord of Change, the generic version. I don't know why Tzeentch would ever need one of these guys, to be perfectly honest. Like, it's a fine flying monster. Its melee stats are kind of meh as far as flying monsters go. For 1500, it's okay, but like, you only get one use of the spells, and the spells are fine. Causes terror, but as we discussed, we have better terror causing options than the word spawn, and you already have Kairos, so you're not really lacking for terror. And you just don't really need a flying melee beater character. Like, usually what flying melee characters like this excel at is like getting on top of a target and sniping them. Think, you know, Blood Dragon, Vampire Lord, or Bellacor's not as good at that job, but like that kind of thing. This guy is not like, you don't need more sniping options. Your Tzeentch, you already snipe things really well. So he's just like, what, gonna fight infantry and like maybe Cav? Like, fine, be just better options most of the time. So this guy's pretty underwhelming. That goes to the ROR too. I said it in my ROR video, I think this guy's worse than the base variant. You get shitty spells. Like, the spells the base one has are so much better than the ROR, so if you're gonna take one, you're gonna take that one. I mean, the extra melee stats and armor are nice, but like I said, that's not what's attractive about this monster in the first place, so. Alright. Missiles. Flamers of Tzeentch. So these guys actually have a really, really high damage output. The problem is that they are incredibly squishy. They only have 12 models. They have 3k HP plus a bit of a barrier, but they are incredibly squishy and short range. They are a very, very high risk, high reward unit type. The biggest problem they have is that as soon as they get shot by any missile unit, they get staggered and won't fire. So if there's missiles of any kind on the field, you either have to shut them down before bringing this guy in, or you just can't bring him, which eliminates their use in most matchups already. The other thing that shuts them down is, because they're so squishy, is just cheap mobility tools. Felbats, Furies, Dogs, and well, name a faction that doesn't have shooting or one of those mobility tools I just mentioned. The only matchup you're going to get away with these guys in these days is against Nurgle, who just doesn't have, like, they have mobility tools, but they're not as good as yours, so you can shut them down. But you already dunk on Nurgle, so you don't even need them. I could see them in a couple other matchups as a late game summon, but they're fairly niche. That said, like I said, they do have really impressive damage output. They'll destroy pretty much any target they can hit. It's just hard to get into that situation where you can use them, and most of the time, if you're in that situation, you've probably already won. Exalted Flamer. Yeah, so imagine everything I just said, but it doesn't actually deal damage. Like, the damage on this thing is so underwhelming. It costs, what is it, 450 more. It does so little damage. It's a single entity. It gets staggered just like everything else. It has a little more range, but its damage is so underwhelming for the price. I've never seen one of these guys pay for itself. Yeah, like, full stop. They're just bad. Soulgrinder Tzeentch. Okay, these fuckers, I don't know why they got buffed. Like, they were already really strong, and then they got a price reduce and an ammo increase. Like, look at this missile strength. It's 500 missile strength with 40 bonus for large on 5 shots. So that's an extra, math is hard, like 200 missile strength if you're shooting a large target per volley. And these guys' volleys do not miss. They have a homing effect. So they are incredibly accurate, even against smaller targets. These are really, really good for sniping low model count units like single entities or chariots. They're even good against killing Cav, though, because they have multiple projectiles. The one thing they're not good at shooting is monstrous infantry. And so, I'll explain why. There's a little sweet spot with these guys, and with some other things too, where you either have a single entity or a chariot where all 5 shots are just going to hit it. Like, it's not going to die, you won't overkill it. You'll just hit with all 5 shots, you do a ton of damage. Or, you know, you miss and whatever. If you're shooting Cav, well, the first one hits the first model Cav, or first model or 2 if it pierces, kills it, and the second projectile comes in, hits a couple more models, and, you know, so on and so forth. With monstrous infantry, there's so few models, they're not really lined up for you to pierce, and you're going to kill the models that you hit. So you're basically going to be overkilling models and just wasting a lot of your damage. So you don't really want to shoot monstrous infantry, but characters, chariots, things like war wagons or scourge runners, they excel at destroying. These guys are a very, very common pick. Even foot characters are pretty vulnerable to them. They just are incredibly accurate. So you see these guys a lot. You never see 2. Like, 2 is just an overcommitment. You usually just see 1, but you see that in a lot of matchups. I've even seen them used by high level players against dwarves. Like, their missile attacks are so good at killing everything, and they do fine against infantry too because they pierce. So, that is the basics of each unit. Let's talk about what builds look like. So, there's a couple of styles that Tzeentch can play. So, first of all, we have our Kairos. I like Harmonic Convergence. And we have, you know, the basic jazz. Then, if you're playing the most typical Tzeentch style is a very, like I said, KG kite style. Take, you know, 4 skirmish cav. Usually, where'd the soul grinder go? There's a soul grinder. Then you bring some infantry behind you to clean up when they're done. When they're done shooting. You know, you bring in whatever. Like, it's just some infantry. It can be whatever. It can be some missiles, some spawn, whatever. And then you bring in, you know, the word spawn, a couple of flyers to contest mobility, maybe a chaos knight, and then probably Forsaken to help clean things up. So you just poke and poke and poke with these guys, and then you go and clean things up. That's the most typical Tzeentch style, and I'll show you a live example of that in a minute. But the build looks something like this. Probably, you know, a little more on the tanky infantry, but something generally like this. That's one style. Again, I shouldn't have gotten rid of Kairos, because we're just going to assume Kairos is always there for the moment, because he's generally just a good choice. The other option you can do is a more typical, like, Chaos playstyle, where you just take Chaos Warriors. You're probably still going to bring some Skirmish Cav, just because Skirmish Cav are so strong. We're not going to make making the spend work too much right now, because who cares? Then you're going to reinforce a spawn and your ability tools. And this is just more of a typical rush build, more typical of the other Chaos factions. Now, let's see those in live play, because I do have some replays for you guys. So, first we're going to take a look at that kite playstyle. This is against Nurgle. So yeah, basically your goal with this is to, you want to poke with the cav and the soul grinder as much as you can on the appropriate targets. But your real goal is to just avoid melee until you can blue fire the shit out of your opponent's entire army. Blue fire, like I said, blue fire is a very, very versatile spell. It's good at sniping single characters. It's good at killing cav. It's good at killing infantry if you can get the right shots and the right angles. It falls in the same category as the soul grinder shots, where monster infantry isn't a great target for it. It can do all right. But generally, you want to be shooting at squishy single entities or infantry and softening that up. Those are your priority targets with blue fire. Soul grinder, it's going to be focused on big things. Skirm cav. In this case, it'll be shooting at their soul grinders. And then your skirmish cav can shoot at pretty much anything. You want to avoid things with silver shields and armor, as they won't do a whole lot of damage. But if there's lightly armored targets without shields, they can pretty much just feast. So if we just zoom out, fast forward, you can watch, we're just going to walk up, we're going to start casting blue fire, we're going to be poking with our soul grinder, and basically we just don't want to enter melee at any point until we've spent most of our ammo. This is a fairly typical Kites playstyle, though it's a little bit odd because you are relying mostly on your spells to do damage over like a heavy duty missile unit like, say, a Weight Watcher. And now we summon in some infantry and spawn to try and actually protect our skirmish cav from the enemy Furies. I probably should summon some Furies there to do that job instead. But yeah. Just avoiding melee as much as we can, poking down valuable targets. In this case, it's the Soul Grinders and Kugath. And yeah, taking free charges on Nurglings we can that are unsupported. But basically, we're just going to give space. We're going to let our opponent take the center of the map. And we're just going to take whatever sides we can get, whatever free space. If there's objectives we can take for free, we'll do it. Bring in some Forsaken to clear up this lightly contested objective. And we're just going to surround him and poke him down and shoot him to pieces. And we barely entered melee, and we've already gotten a hefty value lead. And we've already routed off a large portion of his infantry corps. Now that all of his infantry is softened up, we brought in the weird spawn to do a good deal of shock damage with their heavy weapon strength and charge bonus, and then terror out after they're low on leadership. So that is the first and the most common Tzeentch playstyle. Now, the next playstyle I'll show you is not really that unique to Tzeentch. Like I said, it's more typical of the other Chaos factions. It's pretty common. But if you're playing against a faction that's going to heavily outshoot your skirmishing, in this instance, it's Kislev, but it could be something like Wood Elf. It could be really any of the elves, probably. Or things like Cathay. This style can work a bit better. So basically what we're going to do here is our game is going to crash, I think. Nope, we're good. We're going to poke a little bit, and then we're just going to set up our forces, and we're going to rush their gun line. It's a pretty standard playstyle. Again, a lot of factions can execute it. Tzeentch isn't the best at it, but they can definitely do it, especially against a faction like Kislev that doesn't have the greatest AP shooting. Come on, Potato PC, I believe in you. You can do it. There we go. I should really learn how to edit one of these days. So, similar thing. We're going to be pushing up, poking with blue fire as much as our opponent will let us. If Katarina comes in range, I'll be happy to shoot her, but if she's not willing to shoot her, to come in range, I'll focus on the higher priority, the most expensive units. Once pose the biggest threat, in this case the Ice Guard. And because in box formation, I can't really get down the side shots, but this will do just fine. So the way to line up shots like these is to be at maximum range with blue fire. That gives it as much time as possible to... you can see my cursor, right? Yeah. So the way blue fire travels is it comes from Kairos, and it goes down like this, and then it like hugs the ground as it flies. You want to give it as much space between you and the target as possible to get as close to the ground, so that way when it comes against the infantry, it's basically traveling parallel to the ground, and will just pierce through as many models as possible. That's the best way to get this damage on infantry. If you can get from the side, where it'll travel through even more models, even better. My opponent was smart here and had like his units in box formation, so that there wasn't really a longer side to minimize that. But if he is in a thinner formation, kind of like we are over here, and you come down the side like this, you pierce all these models, and you can do a ton of damage with it. Anyway, now it's just, like I said, pretty standard rush tactics. If I have decided that I want more units on the field before I try to rush this missile position, so I'm just going to sit back and poke. Sleds are the biggest threat to me, so they're my priority target. So Soul Grind's going to shoot them as much as I can. I'll blue fire them if they come in range. I'll blue fire whatever I can really get. Chaos Knights come around the side. Go around the side so we actually get on top of those missile units that are pretty squishy to them. All the while capping our save point to buy us as much time as possible and pressuring the center objective to force him to come forward into the map. And blue fire, blue fire, blue fire. And the thing is, my opponent is counter-firing me, but because of my barriers, I'm not actually taking a whole lot of real damage. His value is pretty good, but most of that has been on Kairos' barriers, so that value is pretty much non-existent in reality. And we're just spamming blue fire until we're ready to go. I have decided that I have enough units. My opponent can't really stop me, so we're just going to go in. We engage his front line on all fronts almost simultaneously, not quite perfect. And then we bring our Cav and our Forsaken around the sides to actually get on top of the missile units and stop them from firing. Yeah. That's the basics of it. It's just a pretty standard rush play style. You just want to wait until you have the right units, make sure you have enough, then engage on all fronts at once as best you can. Bring in Kairos to try and tear her out, just recharge, try to lower their leadership as much as you can. Kairos isn't the greatest melee fighter, but he does have terror and he can recharge, so there's no big threats to him. He can absolutely get away with that kind of stuff, and yeah, that's the basics of Tzeentch. Now, there is one more topic I did want to discuss before the end of this video. And it is a topic that is very near to my heart, in my opinion, the hallmark of a good tournament player. So if we go back to our lobby real quick. This is the topic of banners, which banner you pick. So the basic one, like the standard one, is solid, but it's also showing that you're a basic bitch who can't pick out your own banner. So, which banners would I personally recommend? Well, starting to the left, Sightless is a solid one. Definitely A, maybe S tier. It's pretty good. Same with the Apostles of Change. It's a pretty good banner. I'm also partial to these two, Sothoros Watcher and Flaming Scribes. Flaming Scribes is my personal favorite. I've been using it for ages, and I'm very attached to it, but it's not for everyone. So these other ones are some good options. The other one that I see a lot in tournament play is this one right here, Broken Wheel, the purple one. Personally, I think this one is trash, but I know there are a lot of top-level players that do like it. So if that's your thing, I disagree with you, but that's your choice. You're allowed to be wrong. So yeah, those are the banners I would recommend to really show your stuff and show you know what you're doing with Tzeentch. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching this. If you found it helpful, please, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And let me know in the comments what factions you want to see next. I do have that High Elf video coming. I've promised you guys the High Elf video for a couple weeks now, and I'm working on it. I just need some replays from somebody who knows what they're doing. So I'll get that to you guys pretty soon. Anyway, thanks so much. See you next time.